The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Maryrose Wood wrote the 6-book series The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place, in which Miss Penelope Lumley, an alumna of Agatha Swinburne's Academy for Poor Bright Females, finds herself the governess for 3 children who have been raised by wolves. These are among my favorite children's books of all time, so I was thrilled when Maryrose Wood agreed to be on the Habit Podcast. Maryrose Wood, I'm so glad you're here on the Habit Podcast today.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am delighted to be here.
I am a huge fan of The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place. I painted several rooms of my house while listening to them on audiobook.
Oh my goodness, no one's ever told me that before.
Really?
I hope the paint job came out well.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
I take full credit. I want to come over and inspect.
Oh, good. I would love for that to happen. When I found out that you got your start in the theater, that was not at all surprising to me, given the way you write. That made sense to me that you would be a theatrical person.
Well, I hope that's a compliment.
Yeah,
sometimes
it's just a thing. You can take it as a compliment or not. It's just true.
Sometimes people say, "Oh, she's so theatrical." You don't know if they mean it in a good way.
Yeah, right.
But thank you. I think I can frame that in a positive way for my own self-esteem. But it was a huge influence on me. I really did start out as a theater buff. I started out loving the theater. Was an actor in my distant youth. Yeah. And I just really love to think about characters and dialogue and the construction of scenes in a really vivid way, as if it's playing out on a stage in front of you, Yeah. And so I'm glad that comes across.
And by the way, my wife Lou Alice and I watched what's the movie you're in? The Best Worst Thing That Could Have Happened.
It's the best worst thing that ever could have happened. It's a long and unwieldy title, kind of like The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place. Yeah. But so wonderful that you watched that. Yes. It's a documentary film that I happen to briefly appear in, as it treats a very significant episode in my life.
Yes. Well, I need to watch it again because Lou Alice and I spent the whole time just watching for you to appear on stage and couldn't pay attention to what was actually going on. But it's the story of your participation in, I'm sorry, remind me which play that was.
So it is, the film tells the story of the creation, the high hopes, the crashing failure, and the ultimate redemption of a Broadway musical called Merrily We Roll Along, which had a brilliant score with music and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim, one of the American Broadway musical's great geniuses, great inspiration to me. It was directed by the revered and beloved Hal Prince, who recently passed away, one of Broadway's great directors, very influential theater artist, and with a script by George Firth, and it was based on an old play by Kaufman and Hart. So, and this opened on Broadway in 1981 with a cast of young people, teenagers, and people in their early 20s. One
of whom was you.
One of whom was me, and the musical was a kind of a ambitious tale of young people who are filled with dreams and want to grow up to be artists, composers, and writers, and it takes place over the course of 20 years. And the fun thing about it, and this was taken from the original Kaufman and Hart play that was the source material, the story is told backwards. So we meet the cast, we meet the characters when they're like these bitter, unhappy, thwarted, middle-aged people who friendships or divorces, like things are just bad, things have not gone well. But then every scene in the show goes back a few years, and you get to see the sort of trail of questionable decisions, moments of going off the path and betraying a friend, or that. And so by the time you get to the end of the play, you're seeing all the characters as their teenage selves, full of hope and idealism. So very, bittersweet. Yeah. Kind of emotionally engaging piece. So they cast all of us teenagers, and we did it, but the show was a resounding flop at the time in 1981. And yet, so since 1981 and now, the show's reputation has been quite restored, and it's now considered really part of the canon. It's a big favorite. Yeah. Documentary film was made and gloriously well received, and of course the irony was now that we are the middle-aged people that we were portraying on the Broadway stage, and so there was a lot of layers, a lot of stuff to investigate. So the film is cool if you're interested in Broadway musicals, but it has something to say about growing up, even if you are not interested in Broadway musicals.
It really does, and it's so as of this recording, at least, it's on Netflix. So. Yeah,
it is streamable.
Yeah. Okay, well, I got you off the topic of what does the so your background in theater, talk to me about how that has influenced your writing. You said you envision dialogue and character and.
I just really think in terms of scenes. I think in terms of what each scene is going to deliver in terms of storytelling. I think in terms of how the scene is cast, I feel very physically connected when I write. It's important to me. For example, in a play, you've got actors on stage speaking dialogue, but then the costume designer has dressed them and the set designer has created a physical environment, and the lighting designer has created a lighting scheme that sets the mood. There may be even sometimes a musical score that's a play might have some sound design. So there's all of these sensory qualities. Yeah. It's a very embodied experience. That's actually a word that I use with my writing students often is the embodiment, the quality of embodiment, that when the reader is reading text on a page, that it should engage the physical senses, because we want the reader to feel like they are in the story, Yeah. And when I think about my early ambitions to be an actor, and I still love the theater, we go all the time, I realized that what I was really wanting to do is to be in the story. I wanted to put on my costume and get on stage and be in the story. It was much more of a storyteller's impulse than a performer's impulse. That's something I I only came to understand that about myself after I'd already had the opportunity to be a professional actor. And it's like, the acting part was not really what was turning me on. The part that I loved was being living inside storytelling. So it took me a few years, but by the time I was in my late 20s, I was like, I'm a writer. It's the story. It's all about the storytelling for me.
That is so interesting, because I think those of us who aren't actors assume actors are doing this to
draw attention to themselves.
I was trying to figure out a nice way to say that.
Actors are sometimes very shy. Really good actors are sometimes not at all showboat type people. They're often very interior. That's what makes them so brilliant. So it's a wonderful craft. And don't you find, as a fellow writer, don't you find that when you're writing in your zone, that you are acting out the scene? Like if you're feeling the emotions of the characters, that you're losing track of where you're sitting in time and space, that you're feeling the wind, and that's like a method acting experience where you start to engage your imagination so vividly that the physical inputs, start to come to life.
Yeah,
I feel like as writers, we have to do that if we expect our readers to have that experience.
Sure.
We have to go there first.
I think that's right. I never thought in terms of writing as being a kind of method acting, but I think that's right. Do you are you blocking your scenes as you're writing?
You mean by blocking? You mean staging them,
really thinking about where people are in physical space.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, it has to make sense. People have to open doors before they pass through them.
Right. Yes.
The scenes have to make a logical, embodied sense. Otherwise, the reader is going to go, what?
That's right.
They were in the hallway a minute ago, and now they're swinging from the chandelier. Like, surely there was a missing beat in there. And readers are really astute at picking those things up, and it disturbs them. It interrupts them. It's the kind of thing that, sometimes when you talk to someone, you say, did you like that book? Did you like that story? And they say, I couldn't get into it. Right? That's something a reader will say, I started it, but I couldn't get into it. I love that phrase, because that's literally what has to happen.
Yeah.
You want the reader to get into it. And if you do something that doesn't make sense, then the reader falls out of it. They're interrupted,
That's right.
And so that's what happens. So I do block the scenes. I absolutely do. I try to imagine the setting, and I try to, it's possible, and I do it quite often in the Incorrigible Children books. It's possible to put physical comedy, pratfalls, physical farce. It's possible to put that in a novel, and when you can pull it off, it's really satisfying.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? I'm often talking to writers about the difference between information and experience, and I think a lot of writers feel like if I provide the right information, the reader can figure out what's going on. Except that readers shouldn't be figuring anything out. They should be experiencing.
Well, if we want to start sharing royalties with the readers, if we're going to make them doing that much of the work, I think it's only fair that they should get compensated.
Yeah.
I mean, that is our job. It's our job as the writer. Not that the reader doesn't bring a tremendous amount to the experience of reading. Of course they do.
Sure.
They bring their imagination. They bring their focus. They give us the priceless gift of their time.
Yeah.
Time is really precious. If someone's going to sit down and invest the time to read a novel, it's a beautiful thing. And I think we have to make the experience as seamless as possible. I'm a big fan of John Gardner's theory of the fictional dream. Is that something that you think about?
No, tell me about that.
It's a kind of a cool image that I found influential. John Gardner was he's not alive anymore, but he was a well-loved instructor of fiction writing.
Yeah, I see him quoted all the time, but I've never actually read any of his books.
They're definitely worth a look. It's old school stuff, but sometimes old school is the best. Sure. In my old school opinion, he talks about the vivid and continuous dream of fiction. That reading really, really good fiction for the reader should feel almost like they're having a dream. So it should be that effortless. It should feel like they have fallen into this wonderful world, and we shouldn't make them work so hard to make sense of the world. If they have to make sense of it, then it's possibly it's possibly the case that we haven't given them a fully rendered painting, but we've only given them a sketch, and we're asking them to fill in the colors. And I think that we should do as much of that as we possibly can. No matter what we do, the reader will fill in because they have their own spirit and emotional history and feelings and imagination that they bring to it. They're going to add their own stuff. Yeah. But I think we should color in as much as we can.
That's a great reminder. Now, something else I've heard you say about related to acting and writing is that because you have a background in improv, that has helped you avoid writer's block.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one could talk about this at length, this notion of writer's block. Mm-hmm. Do you believe in writer's block?
I didn't used to. And
what happened? What happened? Tell me.
Yeah, I had I went through a period where I was, and by the way, it was a period when I finally had lots of book contracts lined up that I just didn't deliver. It felt like I couldn't deliver, and was wasting time in the most ridiculous ways imaginable. I mean, like things like online dominoes, online dominoes isn't that much fun, Maryrose. It's
There are much more amusing vices than that to procrastinate from meeting your book deadlines.
I know, but it was almost like I knew better than to do something fun, right? I would feel really bad if I were having fun instead of doing my. I don't know. I reached a point. I used to always say things like, well, plumbers don't get plumber's block and lawyers don't get lawyer's block. So if you're a writer, go write, do your job, and until. It just knocked me flat for a while, and finally had to go off to a cabin. There were hallucinations. It's a long story. I'll spare you the details.
Was there like a shaman involved? I mean, did you really go? Did you go on some kind of vision quest? I mean, this is great. This could be a subject for your next book.
Yeah, it was auditory hallucinations, but
nice,
I was very lonely. Anyway, and really what pulled me out of it was kind of finally realizing that there were people in the world who needed what I was bringing. I got an email from a reader who kind of said, "Hey, I kind of need this book. Where is it?" And just to realize that this wasn't my little personal tragedy, but that it was, that I actually had something to bring that I wasn't bringing to people.
Wow, that's very cool. Yeah. And I think it's ever thus. It's when we stop focusing so much on ourselves.
Yeah, right.
That the magic can happen. So,
but I wasn't planning on me going into the confessional. I wanted to hear from you.
I know. I was curious. So you asked me about improv, but I'm really glad that you told that story, and especially because it had such a positive ending. Uh-huh. And the thing about improv, anyone who's ever seen an improv comedy show or taken a class in improv, which is so much fun, and I highly recommend it if anybody's even tempted. It is valuable in all kinds of ways, and the core principle of improv is listening, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing about improv is that when you're up there creating a scene based on prompts from the audience, suggestions from the audience, the only thing you have to stand on is what your scene partner does. They say, well, here we are in the Forest of Arden, and guess what? You're in the Forest of Arden. You don't get to say, oh, no, I thought we were in Times Square. It's like, no, that's the rule of improv is you listen and you go with it. You say yes to whatever has been established and you just build on it. So for me, that technique of not belaboring, like, oh, is this a good idea? Is that a good idea? It's like, have an idea and say yes to it and build on it. You're only going to find out where it leads you if you just suspend judgment and stop observing yourself. just commit to the listening. So it really does have to do with exactly what you describe, which is to kind of get out of your own way. Stop making it all about what what brilliant thing you're going to come up with next. And just listen to what's happening to your characters. Listen to what's happening on the page, For me, having done improv, having studied it, I studied it with the Groundlings in New York. There used to be a New York company of the Groundlings, which is a pretty famous, influential improv troupe. They're still in Los Angeles, where I live now. But when I lived in New York is when I studied with them. And I actually don't think they're in New York anymore. They had Groundlings East for a while. So when I studied with them, I was coming out of my my acting days. That was sort of the tail end of my acting career. I was in my late 20s. And I knew that I was not completely fulfilled by being a performer. And I had gotten really involved with creating my own theater pieces and directing other people and just being in the more experimental theater scene that was going on in New York at that time. And when I did improv, that's really when the light bulb went on for me. Like, oh, this is about making up the stories and inventing the characters. It's about writing. It really clicked for me. Like, oh, this is my, as we say in yoga, my dharma. This is my path in this life. It's to be the writer and to make the stuff up. So to me, knowing how much material we can generate without, like, you can open your mouth and not know what you're going to say, right? In fact, in conversation, that's usually the case. I didn't show up to this podcast with a script. Yeah. We're talking, right? Yeah, right. So, we're just talking. So when you open your mouth, you don't know what's going to come out, but it doesn't prevent you from talking. You don't feel necessarily like, oh, I have to plan everything I'm going to say before I can open my mouth. Writing can feel that free. You don't have to know what's going to come out before you sit down to work. And when you start to feel comfortable with that uncertainty, and that's also yoga, when you start to feel okay with the uncertainty of, I don't know what's going to come out, it makes it comfortable to sit down and begin.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't believe in writer's block. The long-winded answer to your question. I certainly don't believe in talker's block. Talking is fine. But I really don't believe in it. Knock on wood. Hopefully it's not going to come visit me tomorrow and I'll have to call you back.
Well, you have my phone number.
But I don't. I really think I do. I'll phone a friend.
Well, and also, as you can relax into the truth that what does come out is there's a really good chance it's going to be better than what you had planned ahead for. I mean, that's kind of the I think that's the essence of what you're talking about here. How improv, an improvisational approach to writing is a way of saying, I'm opening myself up to some things that I don't even know are there.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the only thing I would take exception to in what you just said was the word better, because I don't necessarily think that we should even be worried about how good something is. I'm putting good in big air quotes, if you could all imagine that, because it sort of doesn't matter how good it is. It's a first draft. Yeah. It's really just, you're just clearing a path. When you're writing a first draft, you are just clearing a path through the wild jungle of story possibility. You're just trying to find a way through. And then once you've got like enough of a clearing where you can see a little bit, a little daylight, and then you can put on your judgment hat and you can say, okay, so where do I want to go with this? Which part do I want to pursue? Which is a dead end? But I don't think we should be overly concerned with better or worse or good or bad or anything like that when clearing those first draft paths.
Yeah. Great. I want to return to that idea of clearing a path in a minute. But first, you've mentioned yoga a couple of times now. And I know one time, the one time you and I have ever sat in the same room, you mentioned something about yoga influencing your writing, and at the time, I didn't understand even what you were talking about. And so now that I've got you again, I wanted, what's that about?
Well, clearly, Jonathan, the secret to being a good writer is to be able to write while standing on your head.
Is that what it is? Okay.
I mean, that's all I meant. No, actually, Wouldn't that be great? It does probably increase blood flow to the brain to do
Probably
a headstand. So what I meant by that, and first of all, I'll just frame, when I talk about yoga, because a lot of people are like, oh, yoga, like, what does that mean? You go to a room and you sweat, and you exercise and stuff. Obviously, there's a physical practice in yoga, but, like a larger, more traditional, more old school way of talking about yoga is to look at all the practices involved with yoga, which include meditation, which include physical practices, but, include breathing exercises, not just the part that feels very like American fitness class, which, that's sometimes just it's a very limited representation. So I feel like as writers, we have to recognize the fact that our consciousness, right, our whatever you want to call what's going on inside your brain, that's not just gray matter. It's our consciousness that's driving the bus, right? We are doing something really kind of amazing, which is we're trying to create, using our consciousness, we're trying to create this imagined story, this dream, right, in John Gardner's term. Yep. And we're trying to kind of use the material tools, the gross, material tools of words to put that consciousness, that energetic experience in the mind of our readers. So it's a journey from the subtle to the gross back to the subtle. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So we're imagining something. We use language, which is an incredibly flexible, remarkable tool, but it is kind of a physical tool, right? And then we put it in someone else's head, and they're crying because Charlotte the Spider died.
Yeah.
And it's like, who's Charlotte the Spider? She's someone that E.B. White made up. It's incredible when you really think about it that way. So to me, the way that my yoga practice relates to my writing is that yoga investigates the difference between the subtle and the physical. It investigates energetic questions as they affect the physical, and it investigates physical practices as they affect your energetic state. So anybody who's even done a simple meditation practice, which, all of us, from a health perspective, there's a lot of science now that says it's actually really good for sleep and managing stress, and, it's just to take a little quiet reflection time. And of course, many people have practices of quiet reflection, whether you have a prayer practice or a gratitude practice, or, any whatever, speaks to your heart. Those practices change our energetic state. You could sit in quiet reflection for a few minutes, and you open your eyes again, and you can feel the change, right? You hooked in again.
Sure.
You kind of got reconnected,
and
it's a wonderful thing. And so all of these things are of benefit. Being a creative artist is not easy. You have to be. Well, and here's another thing that yoga helps me with. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
That's true.
I have a yoga teacher who used to say, if you like the pose, you're not doing it right. You have to be able to, yoga kind of puts you in these like weird positions and leaves you there.
Yeah.
It's like, well, but how often in life are we put in some kind of, not exactly of our choosing situation, and we have to rest in it for a while. We just have to find a way to be at peace with it, and maybe it's going to teach us something. So yoga poses are kind of a very physical manifestation of that. Like be in the pretzel pose. It doesn't feel good. Stay there for a minute. Maybe it'll change, or maybe your opinion of it will change. That's actually, maybe you'll be able to drop your opinion of it, So all of these ways of working with the mind are useful.
Yeah. And every story that's ever been written has been about somebody who got uncomfortable.
Absolutely. If they were not uncomfortable, why would they need a big story to happen?
Yeah.
Story is an engine of change. That's what stories are.
Yeah. So speaking of, The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place are about a young woman who is always in the uncomfortable, is always in one uncomfortable situation or the other, learning to deal with those. You mentioned a little while ago about the first draft clearing a path, and I'm curious how. So I love where this story to explain the Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place, I mean, all I've got to say is, see, there's this young woman who finds herself the governess of some children raised by wolves, and that setup, it just feels like some story is going to unfold from there.
Something has to happen.
Yeah, right. I mean, am I correct in my assumption that you just started, that you somehow had this idea of, here's this idea, I bet if I play that out, I could probably write 6 books about this.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There was a little bit more forethought than that, but not much.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I will tell you. So I am a huge fan of the book J.R.R., as many people have been over the years.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, and so we are all influenced by the books that we love, right? And so there was a point in my career, going back, I guess now about 9 years, when the Incorrigible Children books got going. Was it 9 years, 10 years? Oh yeah, a little more than 10 years actually. The first one came out in 2010, so I was writing it in the year before that. So a little bit more than 10 from my writing perspective. That I just thought, I would really love to write a British governess novel. Like, I would love to do that. Is it okay? I'm an American. It's the 21st century, and I write middle grade. Can I still write a British governess novel? And I was like, I don't see why not. How would I do that?
Yeah.
And so I thought, so I came up with this notion of doing that, but then I was also very intrigued. I've always loved animal stories. I mentioned Charlotte's Web a little bit earlier. It's another book that really inspires me. I love some of Rudyard Kipling's animal stories. Those that I admire tremendously. And I have 2 kids who are now thriving grown adults. But when they were little, my son especially was a big fan of the Curious George books. And I was very intrigued. I used to read these stories to him over and over again. And I was always very intrigued by the character of Curious George, because he is depicted as a monkey, but he is also strangely this weird little child, right?
Yeah.
This rather unusual child. And I became very aware of how much my son loved this character, because he was a little boy, but he was also a monkey. So when he got into trouble, you couldn't really blame him,
Yeah.
And there's something very psychologically astute about being a young child, I think, that is embodied in that notion of like, look, they're little kids. They can't help themselves. It's our job to accept their essence as children. It's we can't go to 3-year-olds and say, don't act like a monkey, because it's a 3-year-old. He's going to act like a monkey, and so that's fine, So there was something about that I thought was really, really wholesome, really healthy, and I just got this notion, like, what if I had characters who were sort of in that liminal space between being children and being, puppies, basically. And so the Incorrigible Children were born. And of course, there's that great phrase, children who are so naughty that they must have been raised by wolves. And it's just one of those games that we writers play, right? It's like, what if that were literally true,
Yeah.
So 2 interesting ideas that had nothing to do with each other, very much like an improv exercise, right?
Yeah.
Imagine somebody, some inebriated patrons at a comedy club saying, give me the name of a novel, J.R.R. Give me a saying, children raised by wolves. Like, put them together. That's crazy, but that's what happens in an improv scene. And those are the kinds of writing prompts that I like to give myself, because they're challenging.
Yeah.
But 6 books later, I did not foresee every step of the way of how deep those books would go, and how heartfelt and fun they would end up being. I had a wonderful time writing them.
How early in the process did you know the big mysteries, the big mysteries that get revealed, deeper into the series? Did you know some of those mysteries early on, or did those reveal themselves to you late?
I knew the big one
Yeah.
I'm not going to be too spoilery about it, but I knew the big one. And obviously, when you've got a scenario where you've got 3 children who are found in the woods and they're barking and howling, right? This is not a spoiler. This happens very early on in the first book. So this is what we have. We have 3 children who are raised by wolves. The self-evident mystery is who are these kids? Who are their parents? Who left them in the woods and why? And I felt that it was only my duty to at least know the answer to that question before starting my long journey to write these books over a period of, as I say, nearly a decade. But I will tell you what I did, because I'm not much of an outliner. What I believe in is story structure. I have a lot of ideas about the shape of a good story, just kind of in general. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and I can nerd out about all that stuff. But I don't really like to decide the actual beats of a story in advance, because I feel that we learn our characters so deeply as we write them that the decisions that one makes in advance are almost always too superficial. I feel that we get much deeper knowledge of our story and our characters as we write it. And so any decision that I make in advance is usually just a placeholder for the deeper, more surprising revelation that will happen in process. However, I did feel that I needed to know the answer to that in order to kind of to take the people's money. So I gave myself an improv exercise. It's exactly what I did. I said, okay, let's imagine that the world's leading expert on the incorrigible children. Let's assume that this is a true story, first of all, and that the world's leading expert on the strange case of the incorrigible children of Ashton Place was giving a talk at like a society of, feral children experts in London in, 1875 or something. I kind of gave myself this whole thing. I said, let me write that talk and let's hear what they have to say.
Wow.
And I actually sat down and I improvised that speech.
Is that right?
And I still have it someplace. And by the end of that speech, this expert had revealed where they were from, who left them in the woods and why, what the deeper, spooky, unexpected connection to the Ashton family tree was, and how Penelope figured into it. It was really quite helpful. And when I finally got to book 5, the penultimate book in the series where a lot of this stuff gets revealed, I found myself going back to that document and saying, okay, that's exactly right. That is what happened.
That's great. Okay. Wow, that is so fun to hear. All right, I got to wrap this up, Maryrose. I wanted to talk about your Swanburn Academy membership for families. Maybe we have to put some of that in the show notes, if that's okay.
Oh, that's fine.
But I always end with this question. Who are the writers who make you want to write?
This is such a great question. I don't think anyone ever decided to be a writer without being a fan of some earlier genius. I love Shakespeare. I love I mentioned Stephen Sondheim, an idol of mine, an absolute idol of mine when I was young. I was so enamored of his brilliant wordplay in the lyrics that he has written to his many musical theater masterpieces, the sophistication of his storytelling. I fell in love with J.R.R. when I was 12 years old and have read it countless times since. Charlotte's Web is like a book that I'll never get sick of rereading. So I have, these are some, and The Hobbit. Man, I'm a super fan of The Hobbit. And I will, at the risk of annoying any huge Tolkien fans, not Lord of the Rings. I'm not talking about Lord of the Rings. That's fine. You can have your Lord of the Rings. I can reread The Hobbit, twice a year and with great pleasure and find new things in it each time.
Good to know. I love The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, but The Hobbit at least is short.
It's a virtue.
That's right.
It is a virtue, and it's complete unto itself, which I think is also a virtue.
Yes. All right, Maryrose, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun for me.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. I'm so grateful you asked me to come on.
Well, let's talk again soon.
Definitely.
Thanks. Bye.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio and the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to the Arcadian Wild for allowing us to use their delightful song Finch in the Pantry as part of this podcast. Check out their album of the same name for more excellent music.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to fostering Christ-centered community and spiritual formation through music, story, and art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.